Hi folks, Canadian Prepper here. Welcome back to the Daily Dose of Doom and Gloom. The head of the Russian Defense Ministry, the top dog, Sergei Shoigu, has given NATO an ultimatum. He has basically said that if you continue to assist Ukraine in their attacks on Crimea, specifically referencing long-range missile systems, then we will consider you co-belligerents in this conflict. We will start attacking decision-making centers, and we will go to war with NATO. This same sentiment was echoed by Sergei Lavrov, who says that we are ready for a full-scale war with NATO. So the question is the 1 million strong Russian military that has been patiently lying in wait, thwarting these Ukrainian counter-offensives, are they just waiting to conduct a counter-offensive of their own? And is this the plot twist that the late, great Peter Vincent Pry so eloquently predicted a year ago before his untimely passing? Is this the time when Russia makes their final move and they effectively expand their borders to Poland and possibly to the Baltic Sea? Time will tell. The reason why this is so pressing at this point in time, because if you haven't realized it yet, there's a whole lot going on. There is fighting going on throughout the entire front. This is the highest intensity of the conflict that we've seen thus far in this war. The concern is that the NATO countries are going to fast-track the delivery of not only F-16s, but long-range missile systems, which will allow Ukraine to penetrate deep into Crimea and create a lot of problems with the ports and the Russian Navy in the Sea of Azov and in the Black Sea. This, of course, is going to meet the response of the full Russian military, likely targeting NATO themselves. NATO is in a position where they have no other choice but to get involved at this point if it's true that the counteroffensive is failing. Now, Ben Hodges, former general of the U.S. military, one of the generals in the U.S. military, a 3 or 4 star, I can't quite remember, he has said that Ukraine has a chance to take Crimea back by the end of summer in 2024. Correction, he said summer in 2023. As far as I know, this is the longest day of the year. This is the beginning of the summer in the North American hemisphere, which is all the more reason why you should make sure that you are enjoying life. This is another day in paradise. We someday will look back at this period of time and say, man, it was good then. So make sure in between the doom and gloom sessions, you were out there enjoying nature with your family while we're in peak season. Anyways, we got 3 months, according to Ben Hodges, that we could see Crimea wrapped up. And he says that confidently, but he says there is a caveat. What they need is long-range missile systems delivered quickly. Now, we've seen how quickly the script flipped on the Storm Shadow missiles that were delivered by the UK. Pretty much overnight. Nobody was talking about it one day. The next day, Ukraine was already firing them into Crimea. So we know that these threats and ultimatums are serious. They're concerning, and this is how we are going to see NATO eventually get involved in this conflict. We are at an inflection point right now. There is no more ifs, ands, or buts about it. Because of Russia's clear-cut air superiority in this conflict, it appears as though the Ukraine counteroffensive has stalled. If they cannot get fighter jets or long-range weapon systems, then basically they're not going to move, and what's going to happen is the Russians are going to start to counterattack. They are going to start to beat them back, possibly all the way to Kiev. Now, if this happens, what this means is it quickly starts to unravel for NATO, who really starts to panic. We've seen Anthony Blinken try to go do some damage control in China to postpone that conflict because they know that their hands are tied here in Ukraine. I guess they thought that they had this one in the bag. Must go back to the predictions made by the former CIA agent Peter Vincent Pry, who passed away untimely last year, when he said that Russia's plan is to bait NATO into a conflict they simply cannot win. Right now, as it stands, it appears as though the Russians have outgunned all of NATO, plus they have superior nuclear capabilities. That's a bad situation to be in when the markets aren't looking too good, when there's de-dollarization in process. That means that you better get out there and you better weed your garden, because the cost of produce is likely going to skyrocket soon. Now, the top G himself, Andrew Tate, whether you love him or whether you hate him, you have to understand that in this world, in this day and age, the most potent, most powerful thing is influence. If you have influence, that's worth more than money in a lot of ways. You can be a multi-billionaire, and sure, you can buy a lot of ads. You can maybe even buy a lot of charismatic puppets to puppeteer. But the one thing you can't buy is genuine, authentic, bona fide influence. And that is what Andrew Tate had. Now again, the evidence that I've seen with respect to Andrew Tate, and there's a reason why this is considered breaking news, because if they could go for Trump, if they could, and I'm not even like a super Trump fan or anything like that, but this is just showing you guys that it doesn't matter how big you are, if you are bucking the trend, if you are against the status quo, they can have your number, okay? Which is why I'm actually kind of happy that my channel hasn't blown up to the point where I'm really a huge blip on the radar yet. We have a substantial audience, but not that big that we're drawing the attention that we don't necessarily want, okay? And we try to walk a fine line. We stay on the fringes of that Overton window, and I think we're doing it the best way possible. But understand the power of that influence, and here is the reason why. I speculated this in a video 5 months ago that I delivered on New Year's Eve, and I said that the reason they're going after him is probably because, number one, Romania is really on the front line of this conflict with Moldova. Romania is a part of NATO, and Andrew Tate, who has a profound amount of influence, is, by some people's metric, a Russia sympathizer and pro-Putin. He's spoken very highly of Putin. He said that he thinks that Putin loves his country and is trying to do the best and make the best of a bad situation. Okay? And the powers that be, at least in the West, aren't too favorable towards that position. Is this part of the reason why so much attention has been put on him and a disproportionate amount of attention has been put on other people who have proven to have done these heinous crimes? I'm talking about people with various laptops. Have you seen the pictures on the laptop? Have you seen what the implications are going to be? Okay, and why aren't they focusing on that? And why are they focusing on this one individual over here? And the evidence, when you actually go and look at the evidence, it's not that good. There's a lot of people, they'll go and they'll watch one Andrew Tate clip, or they'll think, man, this guy's a misogynistic douchebag. Okay, and it's very easy to write him off and immediately assume that because you see a headline from the mainstream news that he was accused of such and such and such, that, well, he must be guilty, without actually going and looking at the evidence. The fact is, and guys, I think I'm a pretty good judge of character, okay? The people like that who are out there, who can get any woman that they want in the world, they're not the ones who are going to go and commit those sorts of crimes. That on its face should be obvious, okay? You don't need to do that when you have that level of power and influence. It's the snaky people who are hiding. It's the politicians. It's the guy who didn't kill himself in jail and all the people that he's associated with. Why aren't they drawing attention towards that? That's something you got to think about. So this is part of the reason why I don't think, based on the evidence, and again, I don't have all the evidence, it may turn out that there's some truth to certain things. And I'm not saying that, that anybody's perfect, nor that I definitely don't agree with everything that the Tates say. But I will say that on its face, it looks like a lot of bullshit, and the reason why is because he was just getting too much influence, especially over the minds of young men as we're entering a war cycle. You want to have control over the minds of young men when we're entering a war cycle. Understand that Europe is on the brink of full-scale war mobilization. They have no other choice at this point, because now the Russians are realizing, holy shit, our Su-57 plane has more kills than the F-22 Raptor, which has been in service for what, 20 years now? Okay, the Russians are realizing we are now masters of war. The next best thing is the Ukrainian military. Sure, the United States has a very fancy military and all those aircraft carriers that could be sunk by hypersonic missiles. I'm not saying it's going to be easy. I'm not saying it's only going to take one. It might take several. And I'm not saying that the United States doesn't have its ability to project power, particularly into countries that are smaller and don't have a good solid air defense system like the Russians do. The Russians are realizing, you know what? If they're going to consider us to be this bad guy, we might as well be the bad guy. Maybe we should just take the Baltics. Do you really think that Washington is going to risk nuclear Armageddon for the Baltic states? Are they going to risk nuclear Armageddon for Poland? That we keep crossing their red lines, we keep calling their bluff. What happens when they put their cards on the table and they call us, then put their cards on the table? Do you really think that we are going to be talking tough when that happens? Putin is talking about rolling out the RS-28 Sarmat, aka Satan missiles, any day now. So yes, the power of influence is incredibly important. In fact, I'm not sure why they haven't went after Elon Musk yet. I mean, maybe it's because the guy is putting a bunch of cameras in everybody's cars. And one thing I would caution against, before the great leap forward in China, what the Communist Party encouraged people to do was to come out and speak their mind. Okay, they wanted everybody to come out. I think they did something similar in Nazi Germany, but don't quote me on that one. I know they did it in China. They encourage people, come out, express yourself. You know, come out onto this forum and say whatever you want. And what did they do the following year? They cracked down, because then they knew where everybody stood. So this is a word of caution for everybody, including people on the far woke side of things. Because remember what happened in World War II. Mr. Adolf did not take too kindly to your kind either. So be very, very careful with what you say online. I'm not saying be a coward. I'm just saying there's a fine line to walk with getting your message out there and not being deplatformed. You have to stay within the realm of what's acceptable in the Overton window, unless you already have nothing left to lose. And there's people like that who, you know, they've already been dejected and beaten down by the system. So they're just like, whatever, I'm going to say whatever I want. That's fine, because in that sort of scenario, if you're a person who's already been broken by the system, then you might as well say whatever you want, because you got nothing left to lose. In fact, you probably have something to gain. You gain a little bit of notoriety there. Bad publicity is good publicity. And I'm not saying do anything illegal. Got to make that abundantly clear. I'm just saying right now there's an information war. They know that the war is coming. Inflation is not going to get any better, because the delay that was caused with the decoupling and the keeping the inflation down, which is primarily being driven by the disinflation, I should say, is being driven by the fact that the depletion of the oil reserves have kept prices down, have kept the economy cool. Now, can they do that till 2024 without draining the oil reserves substantially even more? That is the question. It's getting hot in Europe right now. They're using more energy. The cost of energy is going up. The reason why it's been so good in Europe and why the cost of natural gas has been so low is because the weather has been very cooperative. They had a very warm winter, and so far it's been a relatively cool summer until now. When it's a hot summer, that means that they need to use their air conditioning more. Optimally, what you would hope for is a very warm winter and a very cool summer. That's when energy consumption is going to be lowest. The grain deal is not going to be renewed next month. That's what the Russians are saying. Okay, we know that there's drought issues in North America. There's all of these factors and the decoupling because Joe Biden decided to do another parapraxis and he called Xi Jinping a dictator. He very well may be an authoritarian dictator. I'm not necessarily disagreeing with Joe Biden on that one, but what that means is that's going to compel the Chinese to act even faster. Now, Anthony Blinken and friends, they're concerned because there's a growing pro-China movement in Taiwan right now. So they have to do something, just like the Ukrainians have to do something to bring NATO into this conflict, which is why out of nowhere, they're still firing their newly created homegrown drones that can travel 1,000 kilometers, so they claim, and they're still firing them at Moscow. Why? Why would you do that unless to be provocative? Why would you try to provoke Moscow in such a way when your counteroffensive is not being as successful as you claim? Now, according to Zelensky, it is successful. And you guys know I've always said, never underestimate the Ukrainians. We should know that by now. Do I think they could have a plan up their sleeves? How could they have not understood the logistics of what they were going to be facing? They knew all of the fortifications. They knew how many mines the Russians had planted. They knew that there was these multi-leveled air defense. They knew they were outgunned in terms of air superiority. So how on earth, how could they possibly not have been prepared? Okay? Unless this whole thing was just to make the case that NATO needs to get involved in the conflict, and we need your help. Because NATO, the West, our countries are terrified right now. Because we know that maybe we won't push the button. Maybe even if we do invoke Article 5, what does that even mean? It's open to interpretation. It's not okay, everybody, we gotta start sending the nukes because Vilnius is being invaded. No, that's not what it means. And many people in Europe know it, which is why the Baltic states are depleting their military arsenals to give everything they can to Ukraine, to the front, which is what Ukraine is, which is what the name represents, the front. It is the front. It is the borderlands between East and West in Europe. And they're willing to sacrifice. They realize that if the Ukrainians aren't fighting a war, the war is going to come to them. If the Ukrainians are willing to fight the Russians, let's just give them all the weapons we can. And it's getting to the point now where they're starting to dig deep into their pockets. They're talking about another $50 billion to keep Ukraine going. Guys, do you think if that they would risk, and they've already risked it, we've already seen how many leaders in Europe fall as a result of this. Do you think that if this was purely political, that they wouldn't have given up and said, okay, we're going to back out, we're not supporting this anymore? This is beyond political. This is all about global control. It's about the financial system, the global financial system, the robustness of that system, and the integrity of that system waning in the face of an increasing Russian sphere of influence. That is what is going to happen. If the Russians can lock in the annexed territories, which are incredibly resource rich, what that does is that empowers Russia. Eventually, Turkey is probably going to say, you know what, we're not feeling this NATO thing whatsoever. The US is going to pull its nukes out of there, and then you're going to have Turkey, you're going to have Iran, you're probably going to have more countries right now because of how Israel is provoking the Palestinians with these thousands of new settlements and all the rest. You're going to have those countries on board that are associated with that whole situation. Syria, okay, North Korea, China, all of the members of what it's called, the OSC, like the stands, you know, the Turkmenistan, Kazakhstan, etc., Pakistan. All of those countries are going to be unified, as well as the BRICS countries. Like South Africa is never going back to the West after what happened, after that humiliation that the president faced at the Polish airport. And I think that was almost intentional. I'm pretty sure that was intentional because the South Africans have already been doing naval exercises with the Russians. So, guys, situation is out of control. B-1 nuclear bombers currently sent to Sweden, and they're not even a member of NATO yet. So that's sending a message to Turkey that we don't give a shit what you think. So Turkey's just going to be like, you know what? We're getting our pipelines targeted in the Black Sea. You know, they don't care about our economy. Turkey wants to be the natural gas hub, not only for Europe, but also into the Middle East and all those other countries, because really Turkey is like the... You know, in Turkey, I actually say more so Syria. Syria is like the crossroads of everything. It's the crossroads of Africa, of Middle East, of Europe, and Asia, Russia, okay? And it's no surprise that that's where there's so much conflict going on right now, because it really is the crossroads. It's the borderlands, the true borderlands. Ukraine is the borderlands between East and West. But we are going to see lots of countries start to turn their backs on NATO. Finland and many other countries have already said to African countries, we are going to stop sending aid to your country if you support the Russians. A lot of these African countries are just finally going to say, you know what? We don't care anymore, because they're going to see this prospect of maybe Russia will extend the nuclear umbrella, or perhaps, you know, maybe we'll prefer Russia's corruption, because while the Western corruption with the whole charging interest and the IMF and all that stuff on African loans, and they can never get out of debt, and this instigation of war within their countries, which keeps them from ever developing, and yada, 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 they might just say to themselves, you know, we understand the Wagner Group is corrupt. We understand the Russians are corrupt too, but maybe they're just a little bit less corrupt. Maybe we can get just a little bit of a better deal from them. And that's what's going to happen. Guys, this is not a time to relent on your preparedness endeavors whatsoever. That's all I can say, because this situation is about to get under control. And yeah, I started off with Andrew Tate, and it's because the power of influence. Just look, the same people who are telling you that this guy is the face of evil are the ones who have lied about every single other thing. Just keep that in mind. I'm not saying he's innocent. I'm not saying that I have all the evidence or I know anything about the case. I do know something about the case, but none of us know the minutiae about the case. All I'm saying is, just remember the people who are telling you that is the bad guy. Those are the people who we suddenly selectively choose to validate what is true and what isn't. If you ask me, that isn't really fair. My friends, I was out at the gun range today as a side note, and I made a little bitty short about a firearm. Now, guys, I like novelty firearms, okay? And I'm not saying you need to go and get this firearm. In fact, I've never even said the name of it in a video for that purpose, because YouTube frowns on that sort of thing. But the reason why I show you these things is because you gotta have a little bit of fun. Is this novelty folding firearm, see it unfolds, okay, like that. And you can extend the stock as well. Where's the button to extend the stock? Oh, I pulled the damn thing right off. There we go. All right, so you can extend the stock, you can extend the foregrip, all that good stuff. This is actually legal in Canada, all right? This is not the first gun you should get. There's always so many Karens in the comment section. You're holding it wrong. That's not going to be safe. That's not going to last for 10,000 rounds. Then don't buy it. Okay? We're just trying to show you stuff that you might not have seen before. Yes, if you don't have any firearms, go get your Maverick or your Maverick 88. Cheap, reliable. You can put 1,000 rounds through it. Go get that. Get your Ruger 1022, the most reliable 22 firearm on the market as far as I know. Get your SKS, get your Tavor, get your AR-15, get your large bore 308 rifle of any brand. I don't care. Go and get those core things. That's what you need. I'm never going to say put this ahead of it, but there's always someone on the channel. You try to introduce a new concept, and this is why we can't have nice things. This is what always stifles progress in the world, because somebody tries a new idea and you get these negative Nancy's coming out of the woodwork saying that's never going to work. Don't do that. Don't do that. Well, then don't buy it. Don't watch it. Okay? So all I'm saying is, it's a cool concept. It's a folding gun here in Canada. If you wanted to go deep into the backcountry and you didn't want to, say, strap a firearm to the external of your pack, obviously in certain places like Crown Land, you're allowed to legally carry a firearm, so you could do it in that instance. But say for some reasons you didn't want to, okay? This folding concept could come in handy. Now it's a 4+1, 12 gauge. I believe it takes 2 3/4 or 3-inch cells. So depending on the length of the shell, then that is going to obviously affect the ability of you to, how many shells you can carry. But it's a cool concept, okay? So have a little bit of fun. You don't have to go out and buy it. The company sent me one, so you don't have to buy it if you don't like it. Anyways, guys, that's all I got to say. There's plenty of other things that you need before firearms. And when it comes down to it, when you get into the nitty-gritty, a lot of these people, these armchair experts in the comment section who say you're not doing this right, you're not doing this right, when you actually go and you do a little dig and you look at who these people are, most of them couldn't run a block, and it's not because they have pre-existing health conditions. It's because they're lazy and they're hypocrites, okay? They are full of shit. I'm not saying all of them, and even a lot of these gun experts, they've never been in a high-intensity conflict, okay? Like, I respect those Ukrainian guys who are in the trenches, who have come back alive. Those are the war experts that we should all be taking advice from. If you survive trench warfare and you come back to tell the tale, that's who you should be listening to for advice. Not somebody just because they know all the lingo and they've had all the training at the range. Look, I am not a firearms expert. Not even close. Never proclaimed to be one. In fact, even the firearms experts I know, like Rod Giltack over at the CCFR, will never say that they know everything. Sure, they instruct people on the basics and they're constantly improving, but we're not experts at anything in this preparedness game. We're just trying to get better. So all I'm saying, sorry about this little rant, but it just pisses me off that anytime we try to bring something new to people and show you something that you might not have seen before, there's always those negative people in the comment section who got to pick out all the little things that you might have did wrong, and this is why we don't even want to do those types of videos. Because what's the point when the squeaky wheel, the loudest one, is always there ruining it for everybody else? Anyways, guys, firearms are definitely an essential part of preparedness. Get those 4 guns, your 22, your semi-auto, your shotty, your large bore, and if you're so privileged like you guys down in the States, get your pistols. Absolutely. But of course, make sure you have your food stockpiled. Get into gardening. There's probably still time, depending on where you are in the North American continent, because the cost of produce is just insane. I went to the grocery store yesterday, walked around the produce section. The price of fruit right now is through the roof. You cannot afford to eat healthy anymore, and maybe that is part of the master plan. I don't like getting conspiratorial. You guys know I don't, but yeah, not looking good. Did you know that Moldova has banned democracy? They've actually banned one of the parties. Now, isn't this ironic? Isn't this ironic that a country who is trying to resist authoritarianism has become authoritarian itself by banning the party that supports the so-called authoritarians? Again, I'm not naive to how Russia and the way that they do things there in their country. There's certain things I do not like, but that just doesn't make any sense whatsoever. You've just banned a party because it supports the country who many people in your country support. Same thing is going to happen in Taiwan. You are going to see the same thing. In fact, they've already sort of set the wheels in motion to clamp down on that party. And you likely will see some civil unrest there as well. It's full steam ahead for Operation Taiwan. It's just been somewhat delayed as a result of what is going on right now and the stalled counteroffensive. The Russians, according to the Ukrainians, have mined the nuclear power plant. So that's not a good situation. If that is true, remember they said that the Russians mined the dam. The Ukrainians insist that it was the Russians and only the Russians that had the capability to blow up the dam, even though you can make the argument that the Russians lost a lot more in that process, but I've looked at that one from both ways. Yes, it would be very unlikely that a nation would damage its own critical infrastructure that ensured a steady flow of water to the peninsula that they were trying to secure, that this whole war is all about. It's very unlikely that they would open the floodgates and destroy their own fortifications, considering the water has already receded. Now the Ukrainians could just cross over if they wanted to. Clearly there's going to be some mud and some other topographical issues, I'm sure, but I'm still leaning towards maybe Russia wasn't responsible for this, and maybe the so-called test missile and all that talk about Ukrainians wanting to test out to see if they could blow up the dam months ago, maybe there's some substance to those claims. But now they're saying that they've mined the nuclear power plant. Is this a dog whistle? Is this the last ditch? If you believe the Russians that they would never do such a thing, and you think that this is Ukrainian disinfo, is there a chance that somebody is going to push the button and try to start something around the nuclear power plant if this counteroffensive does not go well? They are making claims, and I don't know how realistic these maps are, that if there is an incident, okay, that the radiological zone, the realm of influence, the sphere of influence of this radiological disaster would be the entirety of Ukraine, and of course would extend into Romania and other countries. We know all of the nuclear stuff. They're putting all kinds of nuclear sensors, been all kinds of CBRN training. There was recently CBRN training in Romania as well. So are they preparing for this? Is this the last ditch attempt? Is this the fail-safe, the safety net, so to speak? Or is it the Russians who have everybody bamboozled right now? And are they really the ones that are planning on doing this because their lines aren't as stable as they think? You still have Wagner screaming left and right that we're going to lose the war. Is he just there to kind of bait the Ukrainians into what appears to be an easy fight? He's constantly raging about how they're not getting enough weapons, how Russia is about to fall, and this and that sort of rhetoric has not slowed down at all. So it's not looking good. This is what former U.S. general has said, Ben Hodges. This is what he claims. This is not going to be Pac-Man. This is going to be, at some point, a breakthrough, Hodges said. So he's saying that it's not going to be, okay, this is the reason why, Ukraine's gaining X amount of square kilometers every single day. He's saying that there's going to be nothing, and then all of a sudden, there's going to be something, okay? Now, this is typically how wars go. If you look at one of those time lapses of World War II in Europe, you'll find that there's not a lot of movement for many weeks and months on end. Then all of a sudden there's a breakthrough, okay, because the lines collapse. This is what he is predicting, noting that most of Ukraine's heavy armor formations have not yet joined the fight. I think they have like another 9 or 10 brigades that they've yet to utilize. But don't quote me on that because it's very hard to tell at this point what's what on the front line. I'm sure there's a lot of people who are close to Telegram, but they're also, in a way, echo chambers, because many of those correspondents, very few are actually objective. So what they start to do, they might start out objective, but they start sourcing material from primarily Russian sources. So that skews the battlefield from their perception, making it appear as though Russia is doing better. And the reverse is true with Ukraine. I'm leaning towards the counteroffensive is not going as well, but it would be very odd if the Ukrainians went in there on a suicide mission. It just wouldn't make sense. So there's got to be some trick up their sleeve here. Maybe there isn't, and maybe they're just sacrificial lambs in a way to bait and get NATO, give NATO the justification it needs to get into the fight. Who knows? I guess we're going to find out in the next few weeks here. I'm not sure when or where, but at some point you get through these defenses and the whole momentum and nature of things can change. Emphasis on can. But for them to do that, they need long-range precision weapons. Oh, that's what it is, Ben. Listing ATACMS and Grey Eagle drones. They want to bring in the heavy-duty drones, other weapon systems that can reach further than they can reach right now. Hodges added that would enable them to make Crimea untenable, and that's the key. Make the Black Sea Fleet have to move out of Sevastopol, which would happen if Ukraine was able to put ATACMS inside that harbor. Those ships couldn't just sit there. All the facilities would be destroyed. Same for the airbase in Saki and other facilities. So he believes that there is hope. What else is there to say today? I think that's all I got for you guys today, my friends. Oh yeah, the Budanov row. So there's been some weird things happening. Some weird videos have been released. This is just the weird. This is from Ukrainska Pravda. Zelensky, Yermak, and other gods and entities. These demigods. They're now been elevated to the status of demigods. Who is who in Ukrainian wartime mythology? And of course you have the Baby Yoda thing and the whole 9 yards. What I thought was odd, I've already talked about the Zaluzhny video and why it was weird. They had the dates everywhere, yada yada yada. But the blurred faces in the videos, did they blur the faces because those are actually people from NATO that were surrounding him? You know, why would you blur the... I mean, you obviously want to minimize the amount of information of who was surrounding him, but I don't know, it just seemed odd that they blurred out all the faces of certain people and not all the people, because there were certain people that were maybe the people who were around him or people who are known by the Russians to always be around him, and you don't want to show the Russians who's getting that close to the top guy because they might have intelligence agents deep inside that can somehow get closer to him. But that just seemed weird to me. And then the whole Budanov thing was just strange. Either he's got some sort of spinal issue or acquired brain injury, some kind of his head is way fatter than it was. I mean, that's obvious. So maybe there is some medical condition as a result of some attempt at their lives, because both of these guys went down at a very similar time. Budanov and Zaluzhny started going dark around the same time in the run-up to the counteroffensive. So one can make that argument. But even the video that was released, are they just trying to create controversy? Are they just trying to make the Russians look like idiots by speculating about these things? I think that the footage of both Zaluzhny and Budanov seem to show men who are, in the very least, have been reduced in their capability in some capacity, whether it's neurologically or otherwise. This guy clearly has some kind of like spinal problem or whatever. That's the most generous interpretation of all this. Many people are just saying these are deep fakes. There's all kinds of funny memes of him as a cardboard cutout and being carried by Zelensky and this kind of thing. It is just weird. It's just weird. And where there's smoke, there's a lot of smoke right now around these guys. There's definitely fire. People will say, well, it's because they're trying to keep a very low profile because of the counteroffensive. And I don't see why now would be any more important, especially if you're somebody who's further from the front lines, like Budanov, who, you know, sits in Kiev, as far as I've known, for, you know, the majority of this conflict. I don't see why he would need to keep a lower profile and why they're creating this mystique around his absence. It's just weird. This is the Russian Sarmat RS-28 nuclear missile. This is what the Russians are doing. Okay, Lavrov said, all right, we're ready. Let's go. We're ready. And this is what we're doing over here. Brian Keating sent me this today. We're queering nuclear weapons, how LGBTQ inclusion strengthens our security. and reshapes disarmament. So, have no fear, folks. The Russians are creating planet-killing nuclear weapons, and we are making sure that we don't offend anybody who works in the nuclear bases who have already been thoroughly surveyed by those Chinese balloons. If you missed our video on the Chinese balloons that we did with another channel here on YouTube, Green Gregs, you guys got to go and check that out, because you will not find a more explanatory video here on YouTube than that. And that's what we aspire to here. We aspire to bring you content that you're not going to see anywhere else. Green Gregs is a wealth of information when it comes to the balloons in particular. This guy's a rocket scientist, he's a prepper, he's a worm farmer, and he breaks it all down why these are such a game changer for full-blown world war or hybrid war. And then I mentioned that China is in the final stages of building a base in Cuba. So, c'est la vie. Life goes on. Get out there, enjoy the summer because it's hot. It's the longest day of the year, and it's only going to get colder from here on in. Thanks for watching, guys. Take care. Canadian Prepper out.